Well, I'm pleased to know that you answered that quiz correctly, and I want to just take a moment to go over what we mean by that signifier of school readiness, because that took us a while to develop, to really understand what we were signifying with that. What did we mean by school readiness? And so for us broadly, it includes social emotional development, it includes language and communication skills, and that emerging literacy and mathematics skills that children need so that they have that strong foundation for future learning. And you want to think of this as, these are the skills that help children really make the most out of learning in a group setting. So if I am biting or hitting someone, that not only am I not learning in a group setting, they are probably not learning in a group setting either. These are important foundational skills. And what we see from the data, we have been able to track children who have who've been rated by their teachers as kindergarten ready in these categories, and been able to track and compare the odds of them passing STAR tests in math and reading based on their teacher rating, based on their income level, based on the language they spoke at home. And the odds of passing the STAR are much greater if you're rated in kindergarten by your teacher as being ready. It's not surprising. What is surprising is the magnitude of those odds. 4.5 times more likely for math, 5 times more likely for reading. Comparing that to what we know about our low-income students, and also, just to point out, the way to read this graph is, if you are this condition, your odds are greater at passing. So when we say non-low-income students have a greater odds of passing the STAR test, you're going to nod and understand it. I also want you to understand that second one. If you speak a language other than English at home, you are more likely to pass the STAR test at 3rd grade. And that was a little bit surprising, but I was talking about this with educators, and they said, no, we knew this. But look at those odds. The other very important finding that we found in our definition of kindergarten readiness is that the likelihood of performing at advanced standard, that those odds of children passing at an advanced standard, so this is what we consider college and career readiness at 3rd grade, are they on track, are much higher as well. So we have more than 6 times for math and 4 times for reading to be able to predict those scores. Why this is important is because, one, we have an early warning system. And the second reason is because our early warning system has gone off and sounded. For the past 6 years, we've been tracking kindergarten readiness in Central Texas, which is the wonderful volunteer help of our kindergarten teachers. And what we had seen was a fairly stable rate of readiness. Across the 5 years previous, we had about 50% of our kids ready for kindergarten. This year, we only had 41% of our Central Texas children ready for kindergarten when they entered school. And this is of concern because it's going to present different challenges and different conditions for not only our students, but our teachers and our entire pathway and pipeline for education when we look at this. So we wanted to go and look to see what are the relationships, what can we see that's not about uranium storage, but what factors could have impacted Central Texas on such a global scale to change our population from being a population of about 50% of kids who are ready to school to being about 40% kids ready for school. And so we looked at child population. This purple line is the incredible growth that we've seen in our child population from 2007 to 2013. Now, we took 2007, 2008 as a baseline because we know those were fairly stable in our kindergarten readiness data. So we wanted to look for what was going to be changing in the lives of these young children when they were 0 to 3. So that's 2010 to 2013 on this graph. What changed? The red line is the number of children living in our Central Texas region who are living in poverty. Compare that to the overall child population growth, and you begin to see the challenges many children have in being ready for school based on income only. And so to give you a reference on this chart, living in poverty in Central Texas is a family of 4 at about $22,000 a year. So extreme challenges that it presents. And I want to explain a little bit. That chart goes up exponentially. In 2013, we see it come down. Keep in mind, anything above the 0 line is positive growth in Central Texas. Means the growth has slowed in our poverty population, but it is by far not over. And if we look at 2014, we actually see that number back up. The third line, the green line, is the number of services provided for children in Central Texas. And these are services that help families either with basic needs or help children become ready for school. So early Head Start, early childhood intervention, child care subsidy dollars, TANF. And they have tried to keep pace with child population at first, but then with the economic downturn and different decisions, that number actually goes below the 0 line. So not only did we not keep pace with our typical child population, we also have fewer services available in Central Texas for families for children 0 to 5 than we did in 2007. And just to give you some kind of scale to this, because you're seeing lines on the graph, in 2007 and 2008, if we lined up all of these services back to back, we still would have had 2,000 children without any type of service. In 2013, if we lined up all those services back to back, we would have had 11,000 children without any type of service. And they are walking into public school this year. So that gap is what we're looking at as one of the possible correlations that we see with our kindergarten readiness data. But I'm sure you all have also a lot of ideas. What we wanted to also look at is, do we still see a consistent gap with children by level of income? And even with the drop, we do. And you'll see even for our low-income children and our non-low-income children, we saw a drop in readiness. Part of this is explained by some of our municipal dollars that were dedicated for parenting and early childhood services, that when we saw the economic downturn, when we increased the number of children in poverty in our community, cities and municipalities redirected parenting funds and family funds into basic needs funds, as they should. But that meant there were less story times at the library. It meant that there were fewer parenting classes open to the general public and more restricted access to things that help children get ready for school. And so we see this drop and we recognize why it happened and why it happened globally. All right, take a deep breath, shake that. I know every time I present this data, it's important data to get on, but you feel it because you know that every bar on this chart represents children in our community, very young children. And so what we also see is there is some hope. We continue to see a difference between children who are at home with a relative and children who have been in any type of pre-K program. And children who have access to pre-K programs are consistently rated higher in school readiness. And so we have that stable 5-year trend that we've seen up until this year. And for our children who are at home, that averaged about 41% of children who stayed at home being ready. You can see that that drops quite considerably to our 28% average that we had this year. For our children who were in any type of pre-K program, the 5-year average is 56% of children being ready for school, and our average is 45%. And you can see the percentage point drop between those two is not as large. Our children who were in a pre-K program did not experience as large of a drop, which gives us some hope to say that we have a cushion for that drop in readiness that we want to look at. Why this is important in the context of this, of the 300 profile slides that you will see when you log on to the E3 profile slide deck, you'll see a lot of information about third grade math and reading. And remember when we talked about that steady kindergarten readiness that we've seen over the past 5 years, we've also seen steady STAR grades, or passing rates over the last 5 years in Central Texas, and in math and in reading. What we expect with the kindergartners who are in kindergarten this year is by the time they get to 3rd grade, in our region, we will have 1,000 fewer children able to pass the STAR in that year. And that means they will not be reading or doing math at grade level. And the time to start looking at that is not when they're in 3rd grade. It is right now. And so we are planning for the children that we will have, and we are looking at this data as a forecast and an early warning system, because we know this trend will change if we do not do anything differently than we are currently doing. And to talk about how to use this data and do things differently, I'd like to welcome Jacquie Porter from AISD, Director of Early Childhood.
Every time I see this data, my heart sinks. I mean, the first time I saw this data, it created a big pit in my stomach. These numbers represent some of Central Texas's most vulnerable children. And how could it be that our community, our pre-K teachers, and our families in Central Texas work so hard, and these children aren't making gains? But the thing I like most about E3 Alliance and the data they provide is they also assist in providing plausible answers to the questions why. It's not enough to just have the data or receive the data. It's really important that we know why so that we can then move forward with the data. E3 convened some community stakeholders as well as some ISD personnel to talk about what could be happening with our youngest children. My thought process has always been, if you have a problem and you share it with someone else, then you've got a problem halved, and it's a lot easier to work with. And so the approach from E3 worked well for me. I wanted to look at the data for patterns, and so I was excited to talk to others about what the data said and to gain their insight and perspective. This data needs to be shared with people beyond us as it affects our community in a big way. We have an amazing early childhood community in Austin and in Central Texas. Stakeholders from our School Readiness Action Plan, which represent the best and brightest in the early childhood community, came to look at this particular group of students to figure out why they were performing in this manner and what could be done about it. This specific group had a perfect storm of events that they missed due to the time that they were born and the things that were happening in our early childhood community at that time. So I tend to have an ISD focus on everything, but meeting with stakeholders from the community allowed me to see things out of my focus and what was happening in the larger community of Central Texas and what could be done about it. So I asked Laura to come talk to our language arts team and run through the data, because again, a problem shared is a problem halved. And as we were working on a brand new literacy plan for Austin ISD, it was important to put some extra supports in for these students in kindergarten and 1st grade who we know right now aren't ready for school. So based on this data and knowing that these children would not be ready for kindergarten and 1st grade, we were able to add some extra supports to our literacy plan. Meeting with the language arts team allowed us to see another perspective. We also met with our SEL team, and again, I had Laura come and run through the data.
I'm going to stop you and ask what SEL stands for.
Oh, sorry, that whole ISD speak. I did say I had that ISD focus. SEL stands for social emotional learning, and we realized that a big part of what's happening in this data is not just literacy and mathematics, but it's all of what people call the soft skills that you need, those social emotional skills that you need to be successful. I think it's funny that we call them the soft skills, because those are actually the skills that you look for when you want to employ someone. Can they get along with somebody else? Can they articulate what they want? Can they be flexible? Those kinds of things. And so as Laura was talking about earlier with these SEL skills and children not being able to get along affects the other children in the room and their learning, we realized that we'll have to take a look at that to make a change in this data. So Laura came and ran through the data with her team because we wanted to share this problem, so we have it a little. The SEL team talked about toxic stress syndrome and how that was affecting our most vulnerable children. Parents who live in constant stress have children who live in constant stress. And we have seen that these children in trauma have specific needs and need specific strategies to cope with their everyday lives. So we are training all of our pre-K teachers next year on specific strategies for working with children who have dealt with trauma before they've come to school. So I guess bottom line for me is having this data is vital in making decisions for our youngest learners. With kindergarten readiness being such a powerful predictor of academic success, it is imperative that we as a community use the data to help our children be the best they can be. And by working together, our problem is halved. Thanks.
We're going to move on to the next level. I want you to reflect back, thinking about school readiness, thinking about the information, the data you heard. What's the one nugget that most stood out for you? Who had the nugget that stood out for you that we dropped this time for the first year from 53% kindergarten ready to 41% ready? Was that a big nugget for you? Yeah, some people. Who had the big nugget of we predict 1,000 fewer students are going to be ready at third grade based on the kindergarten readiness data we see now? Do you remember that nugget? Do you remember the nugget about the toxic stress that families are experiencing, that Jackie and the school districts are trying to understand how the heck do we understand how to address toxic stress at home? Okay, now raise your hand if you put any of those nuggets on social media. Okay, Carol gets a gold star, others of you, post it out. We want to share this information. It's about the public advocacy. It's about others around our community really understanding it. So help us throughout the day, post us out. Okay, so we're going to go to our second quiz. And this quiz lines out exactly with what Amy was talking about. The brain under high development and the brain under low development as children. If you look at students by the time they reach sixth grade, what's the difference in the number of hours that are spent on learning for our middle class kids versus their kids born into poverty? By the time they reach sixth grade, is it 500 hours difference in learning, 1,000, 3,000, or 6,000 hours difference in time focused on learning? Okay, we're getting up there. Everybody put your poll in. Think about 500 hours is a lot of hours, right? Typically 2,000 work hours in a year. So by sixth grade, let's take a look. Most people are answering C. I gave you a hint. Is it 3,000 hours? No, actually, it's double that. 6,000 hours difference in students spending on learning by the time they hit sixth grade. Think about that difference and think about how we can make up that difference as a community. So with that, we're going to bring up our Student Success Director, Dr. Nicole Prescott. You get to say doctor for the first time this year.